Thank you all so much for coming today, and I hope you'll find this beneficial, and I hope you'll have some information that you can take with you that will help give you insight, whether you're a parent or grandparent, teacher, leader, anything. I hope it'll be of help to you. I've got packets to give out to you, so I think if anybody's not gotten a packet, definitely raise your hand, but I think it's just... I'll put a couple back here if anybody else wants. Well, let's get started with prayer, and then we'll dig in. Let's pray. Dear God, I give you thanks for today, and I thank you for just this opportunity to come together to really be focused on kids and teens and just developing in them a faith that sticks. We pray that you bless the rest of the conference this afternoon, and I pray to just that you would make my words clear and my thoughts clear as we share about media. I give you thanks for your Son. In Christ's name, amen. So we're going to talk about children and the media, what you should know. And as I was sharing, at the beginning, the last time I shared on this topic was about 4 years ago. And when I went back in to work on the content of the workshop, I realized that so much in the world of media has changed, even in the past few years. And so what we'll be looking at today is media from a broad sense. TV, movies, internet, video games, books, magazines. It's really an overview, so you won't get a whole lot of super specific things simply because it's an hour. But if you have questions, please raise your hand. We'll definitely have time at the end to talk. But one thing I want to put out front that I didn't last time, but it was a very helpful conversation at the end of our workshop, was this idea of a code of conduct related to media. So we'll get to that, but in case you're listening thinking, well, we're not getting to anything tangible, that is something I want to talk about, how to develop a code of conduct. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a way that you can have a hands-on opportunity to work with your child or teen. It might help me because I know some of you and some of you I don't. If you have kids at home, whether they're children, grandchildren, niece, nephew, could you raise your hand? Okay. All right. And then if you're teachers, volunteers, maybe separately from being a parent or... Okay, that sounds good. Just wanted to know, because last group we had someone that wasn't a parent but was an aunt, and I just wanted to make sure I geared my comments accordingly. I'm not a parent, so if anything I say you think you're insane, then just remember I don't have kids and maybe I'm just naive. But hopefully not. For those of you who don't know me, I'm currently the outreach and executive minister here at First Christian, but I spent the 14 years prior to that, or 13 and a half years prior to that, in children's ministry here at First Christian. But basically with media, 5 years makes a big difference. There's been a lot that has changed in the world, especially in regard to access to the internet, Twitter, Facebook, phone access for kids. And so what's happening is I think kids at an even younger age are even more connected into media in ways that they weren't. With the availability of smartphones, which I know several fifth graders who have smartphones, they have constant access to movies, video downloads, all sorts of things that would have been more difficult for them to have access to when they didn't have a smartphone. And so that's changed the dynamic. And thus, bullying over smartphones, bullying over the internet, sexting, there's all sorts of other things that weren't even really in the mix so much, at least from a prevalence standpoint. I wanted to share a quote with you from Dave Ron of the Link Institute. He says, media kind of forms this hazy backdrop of influence that increases when there is a scarcity of other influence. And I really believe that. I think that if parents, grandparents, teachers, if there's an influence with the kid, they're going to be more likely to lean on that influence than on media. However, when parents or grandparents aren't around, it's a little easier for them to rely more on the influence of media. Regardless, though, of the involvement of a key adult in someone's life, media is going to play a strong role, but it's not going to play as strong of a role if there's conversation with parents, adults, people in their life. Another quote I wanted to share with you is from Spike Lee. He's a filmmaker. It says, the most powerful nations are not those who have bombs, but those who control the media. That's where the battle is being fought. That is how you control people's minds. And I think that it's a very powerful quote because, as you can tell by watching the news, internet, anything, media really can affect how we think about things. I've seen a couple movies that are really political satires, and it's so amazing to think that a whole war or a whole fad can simply be created by the use of media. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I just kind of want to give you an overview of how strong, as we all know, media can be in the lives of children. A couple key things while we're talking. The way I view things is that media plays a huge impact in the lives of kids. However, I think that adults and key mentors, whether they're older teens, but specifically adults, can play an even bigger impact in the lives of kids. And so tied to that, I think conversation and honesty is really the key thing. And so when I'm talking about the various forms of media, I want us to be thinking about how do adults, how do key mentors in the lives of kids form an influence that can really help kids move beyond the influence of media. Some things, too, to think about while we're looking at these media options are changing the channel, returning the movie, walking out. We need to build in our kids this knowledge that they can choose to make a different choice. Whether they're listening to something on a CD that they just bought, whether they are downloaded, whether they're returning a movie, whether they've downloaded a movie, they need to understand that they have a choice that they can make. And I think it's tough sometimes when we've spent money on a form of media to return it or to take it back to the library or to turn off the channel. But if there's a money tie-in, it can be even harder to just return something or turn something off. But I think we need to breed in our kids this opportunity that they need to know, hey, they have a choice to make. And if something is shady that they're watching or listening to, they can choose to make a different choice. When we're looking at media, I view there being a spectrum. When parents or adults are interacting with kids, I view a spectrum kind of as an order. Typically there's this range of the spectrum that leans from permissiveness all the way over to legalism, and in the middle, somewhere, there's discernment. And by permissiveness, I mean there's not a lot of guidelines for kids. They come and go, they do whatever they want, don't really have a lot of rules. If any, they may not have any input from key adults in their life. Or they may have key adults that just say, do whatever, it's okay. Legalism is very much, in my viewpoint, here's the rules, do it, no options, no conversation, here's what you do. Discernment, ideally, is somewhere in the middle, where we're saying, hey, there's guidelines, there's rules, there's things you need to follow. If you're a parent or a grandparent, whoever's raising the child, you may say, I'm setting these guidelines and rules for a reason. But at the same time, you're discerning in the sense that you want them to understand the rules that you're setting down. You want them to understand why certain things are issues or problems. And so there very much, I think, is a spectrum. And each family is going to fall in a different area of that. And I'm not here to say right or wrong, but I tend to personally prefer falling somewhere in the middle with being a discerning influence with kids. And the reason I say that is I want there to be open and honest conversation with whatever kids I'm working with. My concern is that when we shut down a child and say, no, we can't talk about this, this is the rule, go on out the hall or, go on to bed or whatever, I'm concerned that creates some tension inside for them in their heart and in their mind, and they're less likely to want to share with you any of the issues they're having. At the same time, if we're completely permissive, that creates an issue because the child may feel like, I don't need any rules, I can do whatever I want. I think the discerning level needs to happen. But I don't think that's easy. I think it's hard, and I think that, we mess up sometimes. And what I mean by that is we're not going to be perfect, and each child is going to have a different response. My mom and dad often laugh because my brother and I were raised the exact same way by the exact same parents, and we were in the same house in the same neighborhood, and we're only 3 years apart, and my brother is so different from me. The only unifying factor that would say, hey, he's a Hunt, is that, he and I both have a strong faith, and that's it. I mean, we're incredibly different. In fact, at parent-teacher conferences, they wouldn't realize that was my brother until my parents walked in. So it is interesting because you might have the same spectrum for all your children, but there might be a different outcome based on the differences in kids. So once you kind of figure out where you fall on the spectrum of how you're guiding your children, I think it's really important to make sure that we're tying all of our actions and thoughts into Scripture. And for me, two particular Scripture passages that really encourage me in regard to media choices would be Philippians 4:8 and then also Ephesians 6. But Philippians 4:8 says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." And I think so often we talk to our kids about, doing what's right, but sometimes they may not know what that means. And we might say, well, we'll read this Bible verse, but maybe they don't know what's noble. Maybe they don't know what's lovely, what's pure. And so I think that, one, it's very much a key thing for them to understand, to have their minds on the right things. But then I think we need to explain it, what that means. The armor of God, Ephesians 6:10 through 18, I just think there are so many influences on the lives of kids in addition to media that I really feel that encouraging them to recognize that they've really got to arm themselves with the power of God, really. And what I mean by that is knowing that God is with them, that God gives them tools, resources to use to be able to stand strong when there's tough stuff coming up in their life, including media. And so I feel like the armor of God is a great visual for kids to recognize that they can arm themselves with the armor of God. And so when tough things happen, when the wrong movie comes on, the wrong song comes on, they get a bad text, that they know that they have an opportunity, they have an option to make a better choice. So, where to get started? If you're working with kids or you're parenting kids, my first thought is, determine the values you have. What are your core values? My family had particular core values that I can still see as an adult. Other families might have different values. Both families might be tied into Scripture. They might be God-loving Christian families, but they just maybe look at things a little differently from each other. So figure out where your values are. Then you want to participate with your kids. Learn what they're into and research it yourself. I know different people have different viewpoints on this. What does that look like to research it yourself? When I was growing up, my mom used to watch MTV a little bit so she could stay up to date with what my brother and I were talking about. She was probably more up to date than I ever was, but she didn't watch it regularly, but she might turn it on for a couple minutes. I always, as a teen, and even as a child, felt that really was helpful to me because I felt like if we were talking about something, she knew what I was talking about. However, I know other people perceive that to be a negative thing because if we wouldn't want our kids to be watching videos that are on a music channel, or we wouldn't want them to be watching a TV show, why would we as parents tarnish our own minds by watching that? And I think that's a very valid point. And I think that it's something that we have to determine as individuals as we're pursuing our own spiritual walk, that if we're going to be watching things to be able to help make wise choices with our children, we don't want to watch things that are then going to take us away from our own spiritual walk. At the same time, it's very difficult to have a conversation with your child if when they're talking about Pretty Little Liars or something like that, and we have no idea what that is, then that can become a problem too. And so I think that we have to figure out when we are getting researched and informed on the things that our kids are hearing about at school, hearing about in the neighborhood, that we're watching our own spiritual walk and make sure that we're not walking down a negative path just trying to be informed. And so I think there is a balance and we have to be smart about it. So I certainly don't think sitting in front of MTV for hours and hours and hours is going to be helpful, especially now because there's not a lot of music videos on there in my opinion. But anyhow, we have to figure that out. But we have to be informed, but not at the expense of our own spiritual walk. We also need a role model. It's very hard for us to be an example for kids if we don't have an example to set for them. And so if we want our kids to watch wise TV shows, if we want them to make wise choices in regard to music or how they spend their time on the internet, we're going to want to do the same. And so we want to make sure that before we go after our kids and what we perceive to be their negative choices, we need to make sure we're looking at our own choices too to make sure that they're sound. I think it's also very helpful on where to get started to explore acceptable alternatives. If we're giving our kids a list of things that they can't do, can't see, can't watch, maybe provide them with alternatives. For example, if your child loves fantasy, there are fantasy books that are out there that are not full of witchcraft or scary things, and you might be able to provide those as an alternative. Sometimes some of the movies that are about sports players can be kind of violent, foul language. There are movies out there about sports that aren't that way. And so figuring out, are there alternatives that you can provide your children with if they really like something that isn't really appropriate? And then I think being honest and bold. Media is a tough topic to get into with kids or teens, and sometimes, frankly, with adults. And so I think you have to be honest. Be prepared to be bold, recognize that people might disagree with you, your child might disagree with you, but figure out how in an honest way to find kind of a medium ground. I want to mention the code of conduct idea. I'm going to break a little bit from my outline. Adam, I'm sorry, I'll come back to it at the end too, so you're fine. The code of conduct concept is, and you might want to be thinking about this as we talk about the different types of media, the code of conduct idea would be, if you're looking for a practical way to help your children create positive media boundaries, how would you go about that? And one of the dads asked last time, we might say what they can or can't watch at home, or what they can or can't do at home, but then when my child goes out to school or with his friends, he's going to do what he wants to. What do we do? So one of the thoughts was, if you have a media code of conduct, and you could call it whatever you want, but maybe consider sitting down with your child, if your child's old enough. And when I say old enough, only you know your child. So that could be for some people 4, for some people that could be 10. But whatever your feel is on your own individual child, maybe sit down with them and talk about, hey, you're getting older, you're going to be having opportunities to make choices about what you watch, what you listen to, what movies you go to, what you see on the internet, if you're giving them a phone, maybe what they're downloading, and talk about what your expectations are as a parent. These are things that are appropriate, these are things that aren't, and why you think they're inappropriate or appropriate, and take them back to Scripture. What would Jesus think about these things? Would you want to sit and watch this TV show if Jesus was sitting next to you? And that might affect their thoughts. But then talk with them, too, about, so if you were coming up with some guidelines on appropriate things to watch or listen, what would you think those would be? My child, and then kind of talk through that. And then, work through as a family with the parent leading the discussion and certainly being the one who sets the guidelines, but work through that with the child and figure out, is there a way we could have some sort of code of conduct at home and agree upon it so that when that 6-year-old or 7-year-old heads on out to wherever, especially as they get a little bit older, hey, we've made this agreement. Are you going to try to follow this, this kind of code of conduct? And maybe revisit it over the years, because certainly as the child approaches teen years, there's going to be things that need to change. But I thought that was a really great concept to have some sort of way to come back to, hey, we have an open discussion. And maybe that's a part of the code of conduct. We always agree to talk honestly, to the best of our ability with each other about issues. Because I think that's a key. If a child feels like they can't come home and talk because they're going to get in trouble no matter what, then that's a problem. Our rule at our house was, as long as we spoke respectfully to our parents, we could talk about anything. We might still get in trouble. They would probably still disagree with us if we'd done something wrong, but we could talk about anything as long as we were respectful. And even sometimes when we got a little disrespectful, if we were really upset, especially in the teen years, they were still loving. We then later got, lectured a little bit about what we did wrong. But it was always an open forum. So that was great for my brother and I, because as we grew up, we never really felt like we had to rebel against anything, because we were always talking about everything. And anything that we knew was wrong, we were told why it was wrong. There were movies I couldn't watch, even though Tom Selleck was in them and I wanted to see them. There were CDs I wanted to buy that Don Johnson made that I couldn't because my mom said they were inappropriate, because she'd listened to them or researched them and she could tell me why. And so that was really encouraging for us, because when my brother wanted to buy, some rapper CD and it had an E on it, we weren't told, no, you can't get it. Conversation over, we were told, no, you can't get it, and here's why. The lyrics don't make sense, or the lyrics are inappropriate, you shouldn't treat women like that, things like that. And it was very helpful for us. It then allowed us to take what we were learning in that specific experience and apply it to life. And that's one of the things we also talked about last session, was that when we're giving information to kids, memorization is really important. It's a great thing, but it's also very helpful to have kids know how to apply what they've learned. And so if a child is given a list of rules but doesn't really know how to apply them outside of the home, then that can be difficult for them to make wise choices when they are outside of the home. And so I mean, you can do some problem solving, even related to the code of conduct. Hey, if you were sitting with your friends and they wanted to go see this movie, what would you do if A, B, and C happened? I think, working through, kind of role-playing a little bit. And if that sounds too weird and no way would your family ever do that, then, just think about how to put into words what your expectations at home are for when they go into the public, for when they're with their friends, for when they're at the football game, so that they know how to make a choice when it starts to shift out of the framework of the home, if that makes sense. Okay, so moving on to music. When I was looking in the area of music, as far as the type of media, I realized how completely out of touch I am in the world of music. I apparently am just stuck on U2 and Coldplay and Michael W. Smith and movie soundtracks. So I'm really out of touch. Yes, Adam's in the back laughing, I'm sure. But I did look up the Billboard Top 10, and the first 5 weren't really surprising to me. But Miley Cyrus is right now #1, and she has a song called Wrecking Ball. And if any of you have been watching the news or the internet in the past 2 weeks, you've probably heard of Miley Cyrus and some inappropriate behavior at a recent video awards show. And if you caught that, it was quite inappropriate. And it was occurring with #4, Robin Thicke, who's the #4 top song right now. And so, if this is the music that's out there, and sadly, Miley Cyrus and Katy Perry, some of these folks, these are people who are appealing to younger kids, especially Miley Cyrus, because kids grew up and teens grew up with Miley Cyrus as Hannah Montana. And so we kind of need to be aware of what our kids experience as little kids, when maybe Miley Cyrus is appropriate, or whoever was appropriate, Amanda Bynes, or anyone. At some point, sometimes those great kids models for when kids are, watching TV can become not so great of a role model as they get older. And honestly, I don't really listen to Katy Perry. I don't really listen to Miley Cyrus. I don't even know who Lorde is, if that's even how you pronounce that. But what I do know is, if our kids are listening to this music, we need to understand what it's about and give them guidance. And related to that, we need to understand that not all non-Christian music is bad. And frankly, not all Christian music is really about Christ. I was surprised. I bought a CD at a Christian bookstore several years ago, and it was for the children's ministry here, and there wasn't one word about Jesus on the whole entire CD. And it was a Christian CD for kids, and it was so confusing to me, because it was sold, at a Christian bookstore, and it was a Christian CD. And I've heard non-Christian label music talk more about God than that particular CD did. And they talked about God in a positive way, not a negative way. So I think you got to be careful about, don't just assume that a CD, because you buy it at a Christian bookstore, is full of conversations about Christ. But also don't assume, just because you buy a non-Christian CD, that it's horrible and bad and has nothing to offer. Even tied to that, there's some great songs out there by unlikely sources. The problem is they're unlikely sources because they don't always set the best example. They sometimes have negative images that you can see on TMZ or on magazines in the grocery store aisle, but they sometimes have really great messages to share. And so that's the problem, is our kids are really getting mixed messages from people that they, for some reason, are looking up to, who are in the press or in famous, in fame, that they're just famous. Also with music, the tough thing right now is not only do you have to think about when a kid buys a CD or downloads an MP3 file, or even, MTV, there's ringtones, there's audio and video downloads on your phones and your computers. And ringtones, I'm always surprised at what people have on their ringtones, whether it's their callback sound or their actual ringtone. There's inappropriate songs out there that you can download. So it's kind of tough, because even in the most unlikely sources, you could have problems as far as watching what your kids are listening to. Shifting over to movies, which is my particular favorite part of media. Oliver Stone says that film is a powerful medium, film is a drug, film is a potential hallucinogen. It goes into your eye, it goes into your brain, it stimulates, and it's a dangerous thing. It can be a very subversive thing. I think movies, just like most media, can be very, very powerful. The thing with movies is, even just going to the movie theater can be a bit of a cool experience for a kid, especially if it's a treat, if they don't do that very often. this huge screen, although granted a lot of people at their homes now seem to have screens as big as a movie theater. I don't. But, you have this big screen, the food, it's kind of a fun environment. And, you just never know what you're going to see. I get so upset going to the movie theater anymore. Anybody who goes to a movie with me and a scary preview comes on, they know what I'm going to say. I so want to create some sort of I don't know, I just want to write a letter or something and say, please don't show scary movie previews before nice movies, because it's no fun. I have to close my eyes. But these are the things that our kids are experiencing too, or, seeing movies on, movie previews on TV. I'm always hesitant when October comes because I know there's going to be a lot more scary movie previews on the TV. So, kids are going to have to deal with movie influence, whether it's on TV, at the theater, downloading it on their computers or their phones. But the thing is, movies are powerful. They create images. Right now, some of the movies are, even the cartoons can seem so realistic. And I remember my aunt and uncle went through a difficult divorce, and I remember one of the reasons my aunt shared with my uncle about getting divorced was, well, our life just isn't like what it is in the movies. And if adults are saying that, which that's a whole different topic, but if adults are saying that, is that how a child might think too? Oh, look at those kids on that movie, they're getting all these things. I think that's why for some families holiday movies can be so rough, because if the holiday movies are so happy and their home life isn't that happy, it can be a real disconnect. My dad and I talk a lot about that around Thanksgiving and Christmas, that it is tough because we see families who are watching these movies and they're not having that kind of a life, and they want what they see in the movies and it's not real. The power of film, I think this is interesting. Some people say, well, film doesn't really affect me. I can watch it and it just kind of goes in and out of, my mind. But there's been research done, like when Top Gun was out, the number of people learning to fly increased. When E.T. was out, and you can see when I grew up, but when E.T. was out, the number of Reese's Pieces, like the percentage of people buying them, increased. I don't know if any of y'all remember The Program. It was a movie like a football team, maybe college or high school, and in it they play like a game of chicken or something where a guy runs out into the road and then before a car comes, then he gets off the road and he's kind of trying to pretend like he's dead. And people were really doing that after that movie. The Rock, which is about prisoners on Alcatraz or breaking into it. It's been a while since I've seen it, but the number of visits to the island of Alcatraz jumped up after that movie. When we're looking at media, it is so important to think about the concept that there is a spectrum: legalism, permissiveness, discernment. But we also need to look at what does Jesus think about all this? And I don't want to take this passage out of context too much, but the thought from John 17:15 is, my prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. Like I said, I don't want to take that out of context too much, but I do want to say that I think we have to be sensitive with our kids, that we don't want them to be completely sheltered from the world, that they become, that they have lives that are irrelevant to the world around them. At the same time, we do have to protect them. We do have to give them guidance. Some kids, they just don't necessarily know right from wrong. It's not that they've not been taught it. It's just that every child processes information different. Every child learns information differently. They process situations that they're in differently. And so we really need to give them guidance so that we can help them make wise decisions to protect them, but at the same time that they're relevant in the world we live in. So jumping over to television as another form of media. There are so many TV channels right now, and there are so many TV shows, and there are so many opportunities for kids to see all sorts of stuff at any given moment. I'm constantly amazed right now, and this is no slam on ABC Family, but I'm so surprised at all the shows that are showing right now on ABC Family, because they don't seem like family movies to me, and I've kind of been confused on that, because I just am surprised at some of the movies. And so I think, if you're a parent or a babysitter trying to kind of keep an eye on kids, I would think, me personally, that ABC Family would be safe because it's called ABC Family. But you flick over, and at any point in time, you could see a movie that, while maybe not a horribly inappropriate movie, probably isn't the best movie for a 7-year-old to watch,
You have that on Disney, Nickelodeon.
Yes. And so it makes it really tough. And so if you're a parent having difficulty, imagine your 7-year-old. If they think Disney's, safe and they're flicking around, it makes it really difficult. And that's where, again, it goes back to honest conversation. Talking about, okay, just because it's on Disney doesn't mean it's necessarily good. Just because it's on some other channel doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. And helping them be informed. One of the things I think about TV shows is that TV is just kind of there in a lot of homes. You know, to get to a movie, you're going to have to go to a theater. You might have to download it. You might have to pay money for it. But with TV, if you have cable in your home, or even an antenna, you can turn it on, and it seems to be a little bit more of a constant presence than movies. And unless your family listens to music a lot, music might not necessarily be around a lot. And so with TV, it does seem to me that it can be a more constant influencer than some of the other forms, and it can really affect how we perceive day-to-day life. I've been real concerned lately with some of the, I would say, like early 20-year-olds that I've hang out with sometimes. They very much have a mindset that seems influenced by what they've seen on TV. Many of the TV shows they watch include folks living together before marriage. They include folks treating other people really disrespectfully, making unwise or illegal choices, and as well as a variety of other things. And I think those things are kind of pervading into that generation of late teens, early 20s, and even a little bit older. And it's a real concern to me. And there's also a bit of a mindset when I talk to these girls that, well, if we don't, that kind of stuff is on everything. If we don't watch that show because of that inappropriate thing, we'll never get to watch anything. And that's one of their reasons why they think it's okay. And so really, whether it's a child you're talking with or even as they get older, talking with them about how that viewpoint is not great, that there are positive things they can watch. There are positive things they can listen to or read. But as long as they feel like it's okay to continue to watch inappropriate shows, that's what's going to be on TV. And I recognize everyone's going to look at different shows in a different way. Some people will find certain things to be fine for them to watch, and vice versa. I found myself, I love media. We grew up in a house where my mom loved music. We read books all the time, watched movies, media. And what I found in the past year or so is I'm ready to just give up cable, not because I'm so disheartened by it, but because I find that I just don't know that I need it, and I'm less interested with it than I used to be. And I'm getting a little frustrated sometimes with some of the TV shows I watch, because there's been a couple in the past 2 years that I've just said I'm not going to watch anymore. I'm just not going to watch them because I can't find anything redeemable in them. There's nothing glorifying to God about them, and there's nothing like the moral at the end of the show, or there's no wrap-up. You know, and I always kind of liken it to, and I mean, I love The Cosby Show growing up. And even though there might be tough times in The Cosby Show, there was always kind of a wrap-up at the end. The moral of the story, here's how you do it better the next time. At least that's the way I saw it. And I have a hard time finding those shows now. And it's been difficult because I had a show I was watching on DVR and with one of my friends. And we would get together and we'd watch the show about once a week. And we were looking for the new season to come out on TV. And by the end of the first season on DVR, or on a DVD, I said, I can't watch this show anymore. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be like obnoxious. I said, I just don't feel good about watching it. I said, I don't want you to think like I'm being better than you. I just can't watch it. There's nothing glorifying to God about it in it. I can't think of any point to any of the things they're doing. It's got violence in it. It's got inappropriate sexual situations. And she says, you're not going to watch it anymore with me? We have fun. I'm like, I know we do. Can we pick a new show? And she's continuing to watch the show. She understands my concern with it. But this is somebody in her 20s. It's a great media can be a great relational type thing. Hey, what do you think about that book? Hey, did you see that TV show tonight? It can be fun, but we also have to make sure that we're not so drawn into the fun and the hanging out time, whether it's with our family or our friends, that we're forgetting what's appropriate. A couple of the girls had gone out and seen a movie. I'm saying these stories basically just to say this is out there, it's happening all the time, and if we're adults influencing kids' lives, we have to start to make a choice, even about our own viewing habits. And I'm the first to say it's really hard because I like to watch movies and I like TV. But that they'd gone to see a movie and they came back. And I said, how was the movie? And they said, oh, it's great. It was really good. It was fun. I said, oh, okay, so I should go see it. And they said, well, no, you shouldn't see it. I said, well, why shouldn't I see it? He said, it was great. Well, we just don't think you'd like it. I said, well, why wouldn't I like it? We just don't think you would like it. And I said, well, it was like bad? What was it about? No. I said, was it inappropriate? Well, you would think so. I said, well, why do you think I think it's inappropriate? And I said, well, I don't know. You just would. I said, I think you all think I'm a prude or something. I said, the reason I would think it was inappropriate probably is because I don't think it glorifies God and there's no redeeming value to it. Yeah, that's probably it. And I said, well, why do you think if I don't watch it, you should watch it? Well, I don't know. And I think they're just not thinking about these things. And it's really so important to me to teach kids young so that when they do hit their teen years, they're making the right choices, they've got a solid foundation, and then when they head off to the young adult years, that they're teaching this message to the next set of kids that are coming up. But it's been hard, and it is no fun not watching stuff that some of my friends are. But honestly, it's really helped me feel more and more convicted about the messages that are out there that our kids and our teens are hearing, and how we really do have to stand firm and be bold and make choices that maybe people aren't always a fan of. As far as what can you do about TV watching and your child, I think it's very important for you to know what they're watching. If you were developing a code of conduct, you might consider having watching guidelines. And I don't mean like anything strict. I just mean, maybe you have guidelines like the TV is always going to be in an open room. You're not going to have a TV in your room with a closed door. Maybe it's, homework needs to get done before we watch TV, and if you're watching this show, we watch it as a family or something. Because sometimes there's stuff that comes on a show that might be good to talk about it. And because we're talking about children in this workshop, it's a little different than if we were talking about teens. But what a great opportunity to be watching a show and then talk a little bit after the show about, hey, how does this apply to your life? Or how did, anything on here that you've ever had happen to you, or how would this maybe tie into the Bible lesson you heard on Sunday? Maybe you're watching a sitcom and a family makes a promise. Maybe that ties into a conversation about, hey, y'all talked about Noah and God's promises. We were talking, one of the parents in the last session had a preschooler, and we were talking about how TV shows can even affect preschoolers. And I was telling them that I have a friend who has a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old boy. And she has a hard time letting them watch a particular cartoon, because whenever they watch this cartoon, that afternoon after the show's over, the 2- and 3-year-old are really whiny. And after experiencing the kids watching the show, and then the kids being whiny, on several occasions she realized the kids were getting the whininess from this particular cartoon character. So she decided she wasn't going to let her child watch that show. And the funny thing was the dad mentioned the name of it without me even saying it.
Caillou.
Yes! So anyhow, even with a preschooler, they can be influenced by TV shows. And so we've kind of got to think about that. Also, don't forget advertising. I was telling them, my nephew, Tegan, loves Nina on Sprout. And we would watch Sprout in the evenings when they lived here. And there was this regular advertisement that would come up for dream lights, and there's these stuffed animals that are like a nightlight. And after it, Tegan would always say, I want one, Nana, I want one, Aunt Nene. And we were like, no, you don't need one, you don't need one. It was constant. Finally, we just said, look, we just really think they're kind of creepy, Tegan, and you're not going to get one. Sorry. But the funnier thing was, on one of those channels he was watching something on, they had a home security ad. And after the home security ad, he started saying he wanted one. And so it was so interesting to see that marketing really works even on a child so young. So watch out for marketing, but also watch out for inappropriate commercials, because there's some crazy stuff on commercials, even when they're selling rice. But I'll never forget a commercial that had 2 pairs of jeans walking around with no bodies in them, and we couldn't figure out what the commercial was for because it got pretty crazy, and it was for minute rice. So, you just never know what's on the commercials. But some other areas of media, books and magazines, be looking for those. Just because it's a book doesn't necessarily mean the content is good, whether it's adult or adolescent fiction. You certainly want to be taking a look at what's in those books. Also recognize that just because it's adolescent lit doesn't necessarily mean it's great for adolescents to be reading on their own. Also, too, I would say related to that book series, sometimes the series progress from a pretty tame first book to a more intense fourth or third book. And so just because you think the first book in a series is great and you're letting your child read it and you're just going to let them read the rest of the series, it wouldn't hurt to take a look at the other books, too. Video games, very much, that's something to be attentive to. I'm sure you've seen on TV ads for new video games, highly violent, blood, murder, violence to women. There are great video games out there, but you'll want to be paying attention to what's going on with those games. And some of them look so realistic now that it's really kind of problematic. I don't have any research done on violence in video games and how it affects kids, but I know there's studies that have studied that. I want to jump into cell phones real quick too. Cell phones and the internet, kind of linking those a little bit. Cell phones, there is just so many opportunities for problems to happen. And I know that there's great safety, kind of protection. Some people feel safe with cell phones for their kids. If their kids are walking home from the bus and going home alone, it's nice to be able to call your parents from your cell phone and say, hey, I've just gone in the house. Or if they're waiting to get picked up at a sporting event or something like that, cell phones can be great. But having a cell phone also opens them up to a lot of other things, especially when their phones have capabilities to text or to go on the internet. There are phones that have limited capabilities to call out, or like prepaid phones, and those are things to consider when you're looking for a safe option for your child, but also one that's not going to expose them to all sorts of influences. Sexting, bullying, all these things can happen through a smartphone or just through your texting capabilities. Jumping over to the internet, similarly related, this is just an area that continually, to me, changes. There are, all sorts of blogs, Facebook. I laughed because the last time I worked on this workshop, MySpace was being used, Zynga pages. I never hear about MySpace and Zynga. And we were just talking, the youth staff and I, last week about MySpace. I said, does anybody use MySpace anymore? And they said, well, musicians use it a lot. I'm like, okay. I said, because I never hear about anybody saying MySpace. I don't even know if anybody's ever even heard of Zynga anymore. And so I'm sure that in 5 years, or maybe even in like 5 minutes, there's going to be new stuff out there that people are using. So parents have to stay informed. Adults have to stay informed about what their kids are being exposed to. And, this whole concern, too, about sometimes kids or teens, particularly teens, will go on and create a secondary page for themselves. And so, like, they might have a Facebook page that their parents have given thumbs up on, but then they go and create their other page for their friends to see. I just was talking with a mom the other day who is highly attentive to her child and who has a very rural-oriented daughter. The daughter has a blog, and the mom had no idea. And so they shut it down because one of the concerns is that kids are getting on the internet and they're just not realizing that what they're posting and what they're putting is out there for everybody to see. So they could pretty much tell them tell a child predator their whereabouts and nobody would know. At the same time, a lot of parents and adults do the same thing. And so I think we have to work on the example we set. I've seen so many relationships have trouble because of my status on Facebook. Not my status, but like their status on Facebook. They change who they're dating, or if they're having trouble in their marriage, or all sorts of things, and it creates problems. So imagine if it creates problems for adults, it could create problems for children too. So setting the right example for them. I just heard about something called Wayback Machine, and basically you can go way back. I certainly hope this is real, but Wayback is a tool that you can use to see previous posts that people have made. So businesses and organizations are using this Wayback tool to see what people have posted previously because they want to make sure that they're bringing the right people into their organizations. So that adds a whole nother level of reason for kids and teens to be posting appropriate, smart things. I mean, I've seen my cousin's Facebook pages, and oh goodness, I don't have Facebook anymore, and I was always concerned when I did if people would go onto my cousin's Facebook page because just lots of foul language and inappropriateness. And I had a younger cousin that had an appropriate page, but she had no privacy settings. And so I wasn't even her friend, and I could go on and see everything about this 13-year-old in Niagara Falls. And so, we talked to my aunt, Sarah needs to have some privacy settings if she's going to have a Facebook page. And so I think we really need to be paying attention. Julie Posey, with a organization that basically is keeping an eye out to protect kids from pedophiles, says, and this is an older quote, but all I do is say I'm 13 and I get 20 to 40 contacts. They go right for the kill and start asking me what I'm wearing. And there are people out there that are up to no good. We know that, but I think sometimes kids forget that. And I think, not that we want to scare them, but we need them to understand that not everybody is, what they profess to be. Blogs, chat rooms, online communities, just got to be aware and up to date and find out what your kids are doing. If you have tools on your computer to screen where the kids have been online, that's great. Let's see, moving on just a little bit. I think that figuring out what those digital controls are on your computer is very helpful. That might be another great conversation to have if you're developing a code of conduct. What are the limits on your internet scanning? What are the limits that you have as a family for what kids can and can't look at on the internet? And work through those. Also, too, just being careful with the internet, regardless of your settings, because people can find crazy stuff without even realizing it. I was sitting at my house with friends of mine, husband and wife, and their 3rd grade son, and he was looking up X-Men. He just wanted to show us X-Men because we'd seen the movie together. He looked up X-Men, and as soon as he typed in X-Men on the internet, all of a sudden, other things popped up, apparently related to the letter X. So, of course, we're all saying, cover Isaiah's eyes, and his dad's trying to get the computer off, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So anyhow, poor Isaiah, because the kid he was just, I didn't mean to, Mommy and Daddy. He was so upset. And we were all sitting there. There were 3 adults in the room. And he just was looking up a comic book, And that's, I think, something we've got to realize is that even with guidelines, kids can still get in trouble unintentionally. And so we can't just assume that the parameters we have on a computer, or some people put parameters on their TV settings, that those are always going to prevent everything. And so we do have to make sure that we're being careful, that we're being attentive, and we need to be honest with the kids so that if something comes up like that, or they unintentionally expose themselves to not something great, that they can say, hey, Mom, Dad, here's what happened, I'm so sorry, can we talk through this? Because I'm sure Isaiah, after that stuff popped up on the TV or on the internet, probably had a conversation with his dad about some stuff. So I think that we need to have an open forum so kids know stuff is going to happen. We know sometimes it's not intentional. Let's talk about it. And that's where I think that code of conduct is a great kind of, framework to give you a context for talking. Also, don't forget Twitter. Certainly people can know anything you're doing at a moment's notice, and so I think kids need to understand, why would you want to blog every single thing you do? Why would you want to type up every single thing you do? And let's talk about the safety level of that and also the practicality of it and what are they trying to accomplish. I do think that with your computer and even really with your TV, thinking through where you place those in the home. If something inappropriate were to pop up while the TV or computer was in a child's bedroom, you're probably less likely to see that. However, if the computer and the TV are in a central location, whether it's the kitchen, whether it's the living room or a homework room, just somewhere that you're more easily going to see what's going on, that's really helpful. So you might consider that. It's a lot more difficult now, though, with laptops and tablets and kids having such a portable means to go to another room. You might have a guideline like, hey, if you're using the tablet, you got to use it out here in the kitchen where I can see you or something. So making sure you're keeping an eye on that. And if you can't do that, then maybe checking their history, where they have been. Also remembering, though, you've got to have the honest conversations. You've got to give them some guidelines because they can access other people's tablets and other people's computers, their computers at school. They can have access to other things even if they're not in your home. So, what can you do? I do have some sheets that I wanted to pass out to you. Let's see. One is a sheet. It's called Making Good Media Choices. And actually, I can just pass this out here in a minute. But Making Good Media Choices. And it's a really great conversation starter for your kids, really geared for children. And it's something that it looks at media from their perspective. I need to ask good questions. Why do I want to listen to something? Why do I want to watch it? What does it say about God, about me? Encouraging them to investigate their choices, encouraging them to talk to their parents about them, encouraging them to compare certain choices with other choices to see what's a better choice, encouraging them to pray about it. So I do have that sheet, which might be a good conversation starter for any time kids are making a media choice. Especially, too, if there was something you didn't want them to see or engage in, you could say, hey, let's talk about this. Here's some questions to ask. I've also got a sheet for you that's called Resources to Help You. And basically it lists a variety of websites you can go on to look for information. Gives you some ideas for engaging with your kids. And on the back has some media-related questions that are more geared towards teenagers, more with phone, internet, that type of thing. But you might find it helpful for your children. So I'll have those to give to you here in a moment. Well, I know that's a huge overview and not very much time. If you have questions, feel free to, my business card is actually on the wall as you exit the building. Nikki Hunt. I'm more than happy to answer questions or email you digitally any of the things I gave you. So thank you guys so much.
Thank